Hello and welcome to another episode of BB's Finds. I'm Blake B. This is the only channel on YouTube where a guy extemporaneously talks about his collections while sitting in a closet that's shared by his wife. As you can see, lovely clothes behind me. This is my wife's clothes. I'm not going to do an episode today about her clothes collection, but I am going to do what I have been talking about for the last few episodes is a Twin Peaks. This is a viewer request. My friend Matt, the Halloween guy, he's also a Twin Peaks fan. Probably the biggest Twin Peaks fan I know beside myself. Um, so it's gonna be a talk. It's gonna be more of a talking video than show collection video. I've got about 5 pieces of Twin Peaks stuff. There's really not much else besides beside like clothing, apparel, and things like that. I've seen some shirts. I saw just a rando wearing a Killer Bob shirt. We'll get to Killer Bob later. The collection is pretty much limited to DVDs and soundtracks. The show itself was created by David Lynch and Mark Frost. Many people just attribute it to David Lynch. It's Mark Frost. I at least my belief is that he has just an equal or is equal a pull as David Lynch, creating this world, creating this mythology of Twin Peaks. We've got the Twin Peaks Definitive Gold Box Edition. This is the DVD set of the original series that was run on ABC television in the early 1990s. Then we've got the Twin Peaks: The Return, which was a limited one-season return. I think it was 3 years ago on Showtime network. Then we have a Criterion Collection copy of Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, which is the prequel film to the original series. Then I've got some soundtrack stuff I wanted to show as well. Again, there's not too much in the way of media beyond soundtracks and DVD releases. Obviously Blu-ray releases and the various iterations of, the records and things that they're repressing, because there's probably more of an interest now because of the Return of Twin Peaks series that was put out. There were a few books that were put out. I've actually come across one of them. It was a journal of a young Agent Dale Cooper in the television show, played by Kyle MacLachlan, one of his better known roles. And then there's some Mark Frost, and I think Mark Frost mainly has a hand in writing them, but David Lynch maybe contributes a little bit. But in terms of surrounding mythologies and things like that, I think there's like either 2 or 3 additional books. If you're interested in trying to absorb more of the sort of the narrative and the background stories and things like that may be. There's a lot of questions with Twin Peaks. I think they like to leave it open-ended. And even with those books, I feel like if you read them, they're really not going to answer much. So I want to talk about my history with Twin Peaks, and then we'll launch into kind of the mythology of the show. The movie Twin Fire Walk with Me kind of plays into that, as well as the Return. So the first time I ever saw Twin Peaks, I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. I was in a hotel room with my parents and brother in Las Vegas, Nevada. We were there for the weekend, maybe, or for a few days. And my mom at the time, she was watching the original run of Twin Peaks. Didn't realize it wasn't really kid appropriate. The only reason I say that is because the scenes in the Black Lodge, where it came on the TV, it didn't really scare me. It just intrigued me more than anything. It wanted to make me explore that world a little bit more and try to figure out what was going on. In the Black Lodge, they talk backwards. It's a room with red velvet curtains. It's very iconic. Room with red velvet curtains and sort of zigzag white and black floor. There's usually a couch or a chair in there, and then there's usually 1 or 2 characters from the show. Sometimes there's more. It's supposed to represent basically a place of eternal evil, where evil gathers and perpetuates their plans. It's sort of like an interdimensional space that exists. you can get stuck there. Um, Equivalent to the Black Lodge, there's also what's known as the White Lodge, where the fireman is the main um, fireman is the main person in the White Lodge, who's been a very enigmatic character, and his purpose in the story wasn't really revealed until the return, which we'll get to. But he, he represents the good in the universe, or the good in the world, and trying to solve things, and trying to play a game of chess, if you will, with the people in the Black Lodge. It's sort of an allegory of good versus evil on a whole, a never-ending allegory, it seems, from at least the point of view of the storytelling. Trying to think if there's anything else pertinent to my history with the show. The original run is on most streaming services. I believe it's still on Netflix. The Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me was on. I think it was on Criterion Channel and things like that. Now that there's a Criterion release of the film, or you can just pick it up. The non-Criterion release is pretty easy to come by. I mean, it's only probably a few bucks on Amazon. The limited series, the Return DVD set, you can either get that, stream that on Showtime's streaming service, is how I watched it, or you could buy a DVD set. I've got the DVD set as well. So let's talk about the original show in the '90s, Twin Peaks. All right. Where to start? Like I said, this is a show about good versus evil. Two diametrically opposed forces, basically coming at each other head on. We've got the show opens with a murder, dead body. The dead body belongs to someone in the town of Twin Peaks, Laura Palmer, played by Cheryl Lee. Over the course of the first season, investigators are brought in to determine how she died. There's a FBI agent, Agent Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, who's sort of the main character of the show. Not so much in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, the movie, but he also plays prominently into the limited series, the Return. Basically comes to town. His methods are very different from a normal detective. He involves himself with mysticism, a lot of mysticism and occult type concepts. He basically believes, I think he internally believes, that there's something, the forces of good and evil just go beyond people's decision making, and that he can really get to the root of it if he's thinking about the problems, trying to solve crimes more metaphysically. The fact that he's in town sort of plays into his love of sort of Americana, and I think Lynch is that's kind of how he frames the first. Lynch directed it, the first 2 seasons of the show, but that's how he kind of frames it a little bit. There's a lot of music and things like that that are very not really like a Prairie Home Companion, but kind of on that same road of like that whole like G Shucks, like for example, Dale Cooper likes to eat cherry pie. He likes a damn good cup of coffee. There's a lot of scenes at the cafe in town. So there's a lot of food. Food plays a prominent role into it, and it's probably symbolic. There's probably some level of symbolism that I haven't really thought about before. But the other people that are part of the law enforcement that are investigating this crime include the town sheriff. Harry S. Truman, kind of an interesting name, kind of harkens back to that whole 50s Americana thing again. The other FBI agents include David Lynch himself, who plays one of the FBI agents who wears an earpiece. He almost like is going, like, losing his hearing, his hard of hearing, so his character talks like very rigidly, and he's like, yeah, like he can't control the volume of his voice, which is kind of funny because that's probably Lynch, in my mind, that's how Lynch talks, and he probably wrote that. He wrote that character, didn't really explain the fact that he's got that earpiece, so you kind of infer from that. Miguel Ferrer, great actor from movies like RoboCop. He's also in it as law enforcement. He makes a return in The Return, um, as another FBI agent trying to crack the case. He unfortunately passed away during the filming of the Twin Peaks: The Return, as well as Robert Forster, who was in it. He played Harry Truman's brother. Robert Forster, of course, of Jackie Brown, among other things. Great actor, great character actor. We've got that's it's pretty much the law enforcement. Then there's ancillary characters. I mean, it's an ensemble show, so there's people at the police station that are, like deputies, under deputies, and receptionists and things like that are involved in solving this crime. Then when you get to the town itself, there's just a myriad of crazy people. For example, the doctor, Laura's doctor, is very eccentric. They were pressing him for a time to try to get some information about their relationship, Laura's relationship with the doctor. The Laura Palmer's family, extremely eccentric. The mom is basically, in more or less terms, a schizophrenic person. Kind of plays into the Return as well. When they did the Return a few years ago. The best friend of Laura Palmer, Audrey Horne, played by Sherilyn Fenn. She's sort of like a seductress type character, and always trying to kind of lure men and things like that. So everyone's kind of got a good and bad side to them a little bit. I think there's some characters that are diametrically just good and diametrically just bad, but most of the characters have sort of this like yin and yang thing going on in terms of their intentions and how they will solve what they're trying to accomplish. Everyone's got a very different motivation. Like I said, this is a show that has an ensemble cast. There's people like the Log Lady, Big Ed Hurley, who's I think it's Jim Hurley or Jimmy Hurley, like his dad. Sort of a unique character as well. So it's like a rugged, like 1950s type kind of old man. Let's see what else. Trying to think of others from the show. Before talking about the Black Lodge and White Lodge people, there's a couple of ex-boyfriends and things that Laura Palmer dated that the police are interrogating, and they've got their own thing going on. The show has a lot of references to like interdimensional like portals and things like that. There's certain places in the forest in Twin Peaks, Washington, where it takes place, where they can go out in the forest, and at a certain time, they'll be transported here or there. They'll get something beamed to them, some knowledge or some vision beamed to them. Very, very esoteric, and it almost seems like it's based a lot in the occult, especially the Black Lodge stuff. The characters in the Black Lodge consist of Killer Bob, who's this this guy who wears a kind of a denim shirt. He's got long hair. He kind of creeps around the town, and he's able to possess people. He's more of a force or a spirit than anything. And he's the main source of evil. Sort of in the original run of the show, the first two seasons, kind of gets a little bit more into how he was created in The Return, which we'll talk about. So you got Killer Bob, then you have Mike, who's this guy. He's a one-armed man. You've probably seen pictures of him. He's got a beard and a jacket, and his full head of hair and stuff. And he walks around the Black Lodge, and he also walks around Twin Peaks. He's able to manifest himself in a physical form in reality. Then you have the Arm. The Arm is a little person, talks backwards. He kind of talks in riddles to Detective Cooper. Detective Cooper is able to, or I say detective, but he's an agent, special agent on the show. He's able to channel himself into the Black Lodge and discuss things with the members of the Black Lodge from time to time. There's also Mrs. Chalfant and her son. Her son wears a sort of like almost call it like a Eyes Wide Shut mask, but it's made out of it's like paper mache. It's like all white. It's kind of like a weird, Lynch is into the weird kind of visuals and things like that. There's like woodsmen as well that hang out in the Black Lodge from time to time that are sort of denizens of evil that are not really They're sort of like grunts for Killer Bob and all these other people. Oh, by the way, David Bowie. Although he wasn't featured on the show, David Bowie also plays a special agent who's sort of onto, he sort of catches onto the source of the evil, and ends up disappearing completely. His name in the show is Philip Jeffries, so there's a lot of references to him. Kyle MacLachlan, when he's walking around the show, he's always talking into a tape recorder to someone called Diane. We never really see Diane in the original run of the show. It does play into the return. We'll get there. Let's see what else we got. White Lodge, you got the White Lodge represents good, purity, trying to combat the evil in the universe or the world. You've got what's called the Fireman. He's a taller guy. He almost looks like a what I would call a giant or a giant human. He's skinny, but he's not like big, but he's like tall guy, bald head. They weren't really given. He wasn't really given a name until the return, but he goes by the Fireman. So he's there to clue the agents and mostly Dale Cooper into the true nature of what happened with this murder. The murder is just it's almost like a pivotal point for the whole mythology. It's like this one event that kind of begets this whole just crazy line of other events. So Twin Peaks, they're able to solve the murder and determine that it's Laura Palmer's father who did murder her. The problem is they didn't know he was possessed by Killer Bob. Cooper knew that, and at the very end of the series, Cooper is dating someone in Twin Peaks, has a girlfriend there and stuff like that. And the last scene of the original run is the second season is Cooper looking into a mirror and basically breaking the mirror, seeing a reflection of Killer Bob. So Cooper becomes the body of Cooper becomes Killer Bob, and Cooper's soul is transported into the Black Lodge. So let's pause there. Let's talk about Fire Walk with Me. Fire Walk with Me, great movie. It's a good companion piece to the series. This is the Criterion version of Fire Walk with Me. This is a prequel to the Twin Peaks original 2-season run. Many of the main characters are in the show. There's not so much Kyle MacLachlan, but that's okay. This is more about the story of Laura Palmer and how she was able to be murdered and how it was done. It sort of gets into the nitty gritty of all the stuff that came before. Twin Peaks has this kind of it's almost like this like quiet, charming town, but it's got like this seedy underbelly where everyone's kind of got like I said, they have like two sides. They have kind of like the pure side, but then like they've got this side which is a little bit more gritty. With Fire Walk with Me, you get the return of Angelo Badalamenti, who did the original film score. I've got my CD copy here of the Badalamenti soundtrack. It's great. There's some tracks on here that just stand out. I think there was like some club scenes and things like that, almost like just guitar based music. Badalamenti is a piano player by trade, but there's some stuff that's banned. There's a lot of jazzy type numbers, like a lot of he kind of just it's almost like a film noir. And I think the whole series kind of is a tribute to film noir as well. Here we've got a Twin Peaks, the original series cassette tape that I've had for some time, but it's the original soundtrack for the show. Fire Walk with Me is pretty good. It's about an hour and a half, so it's not very long, not very much of an investment. I would definitely recommend watching the series before you watch this. It's almost, if you watch this, you're almost watching things completely out of context, and you'll probably have a lot more questions. David Lynch is in this. There's some scenes with him that are just kind of hilarious, where he's doing some just usual weirdo stuff. We're talking about the guy who did Eraserhead and among other things. The Mulholland Drive movie, Inland Empire. So he's got just a lot of crazy ideas and tends to flesh them out pretty well. He's a painter by trade. In terms of his art, that's how he started painting. He practices transcendental meditation. He mostly when he relates to the public, he mostly relates to them about the TM stuff, transcendental meditation, rather than the narrative of Twin Peaks or his other works, leaving a lot to the imagination. I think that's good. I think that's healthy, especially in this culture where there's a lot of this like fan service concept where people just want what they want, and they want, they're essentially trying to solve a mystery. Think about like Game of Thrones, for example. Game of Thrones. They're trying to solve a mystery. Everyone wants to be right. Everyone's so obsessed with being right about what happens that they're missing the point. Narrative is a journey. To me, at least, it's a journey of getting from point A to point B. Typically, in a story structure. And sometimes you don't arrive at point B because in your mind, point B exists, but in the author, the narrator's mind, there is a point B, and the point B is the unknown. So that's what's great about Lynch is there's a lot of just unknown and a lot of like unsettling kind of things that philosophically that you can think about. This is it's just more of a primer of the characters and kind of the story leading up to the original first two seasons of Twin Peaks. You've got some great great music, as I mentioned, and also have some of the characters and just some of the things, like some questions are answered. Like there's some deleted scenes on here with Philip Jeffries played by David Bowie. And you never really got to see him in the series. They just mentioned him a lot, and kind of get to see him. And he walks into a police station, but only a few people can see him. The FBI offices rather. Only a few people can see him, and then he disappears mysteriously, and then he ends up in South America. It's craziness. All right, so let's talk about. Okay, it's running a little long. I apologize for that. I do like to talk. I do have a lot of things to say about Twin Peaks. I'm trying to keep this as condensed as possible, especially for people who haven't seen the show. We'll talk about The Return now. This is Twin Peaks: The Return. So this is years and years later, after the events of season 2. Dale Cooper exists. Here's where things start to get a little wacky. So Dale Cooper exists. The problem is the Dale Cooper that exists in reality is the one who's being possessed by Killer Bob, and he's basically set up this entire syndicate of crime and he's trying to basically trap the real Dale Cooper, whose soul is in the Black Lodge currently, in there for good. The Cooper who's in the Black Lodge is able to escape the Black Lodge with the help of the firemen. He went to the White Lodge for a minute. I think you're able to transfer between the Black and the White Lodge somehow if your soul departs from reality. I'm not exactly sure about the mechanics of that. I'm sure if you read the Frost books and things like that, there might be some more clues. I don't think these guys are going to give away their secrets very easily, but he's able to take his soul and put it in a body of a guy who looks like Kyle MacLachlan, who's named Dougie Jones. Dougie Jones, you can think of him as sort of like a very low IQ person. No one really knows that. It's almost like being like a newborn baby, or like someone who's trying to learn things after like maybe a stroke or something like that. Where Dougie is sort of like he knows he's inside. He knows in his own head that he's really Agent Cooper, but he has to relearn everything pretty much, and there's things that maybe trigger him about Twin Peaks more often than not, about what happened with the Laura Palmer case, and that it meant really something bigger in terms of good versus evil. So the series sort of has many locations. It doesn't take place in just Twin Peaks like the original 2 seasons did. There's also some stuff happening in Vegas, stuff happening in New York City. There's some stuff happening, I think it's in South Dakota. Again, ensemble cast. There's usually like one guest star per episode on average. There's musical guests as well. They play at the Red Room. There's usually like probably on average about one musical guest per episode, which is a departure from the original series. It's basically about Cooper, evil Cooper, trying to maintain his strangleholds and trying to preserve the evilness, and about good Cooper, who's now in the body of Dougie Jones and trying to get himself back up to speed on this fight between good and evil. One of the episodes, I think it's episode 6, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I do this very extemporaneously, talk off the top of my head. I don't use notes. There's no Wikipedia. There's no cell phone. Actually, the cell phone's in front of me. It's the one I'm recording on right now. But the episode, there's an episode that basically talks about the origin of Killer Bob. Ultimately, there's an entity called Jowday. In the series and in some of the movies, they refer to Judy from time to time, but no one really knows what they're talking about. Even the Bowie character, Philip Jeffries, says in Fire Walk with Me, I don't want to talk about Jowday or Judy. I don't want to talk about Judy, but it's really Jowday. Lynch's character explains this in The Return, that it's this sort of like malevolent force of evil that is just in the universe. What happens is in the 1940s, when they were doing the Manhattan Project and creating the atomic bomb, the first time they tested the atomic bomb, they show it on screen and it's very visual. I highly recommend watching the episodes. One of the oddest ones I've ever seen on TV of any series. This atomic bomb in space, it releases like it releases this like, it looks like matter just coming, like kind of spewing out, like just imagine like a mini Big Bang, but from that Big Bang you see like Killer Bob's head. It's like this like globe, and it lands on Earth. So it releases evil. So this atomic bomb essentially releases evil, and then what the White Lodge did people do, the fireman and his wife, who looks kind of like an opera singer. They've got all these like weird things, and they kind of float around from time to time, and it's very odd. But they're able to see with a telescope, or some sort of like screen, like television screen. I'm not exactly remembering things correctly, but they're able to see the head of Killer Bob heading toward Earth. So they release this like sphere, this like glowing golden sphere. It's all shot in black and white, but to me it's golden. Of Laura Palmer, like a head of Laura Palmer heading toward the same area to try to combat that. So I think again that kind of brings into the whole thing of like good versus evil. Again, the sheriff in The Return, in Harry S. Truman's Absent, is his brother, played by Robert Forster. There's a lot of returning cast people, sporting characters especially. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's extremely pertinent about this. This is very just dense in terms of mythology and storytelling. If you like things that are a little odd, I highly recommend watching this. But again, you probably want to watch both the original series and the Fire Walk with Me movie as a primer before you watch this, just to get a sort of base on the sort of the concepts, not so much the characters, because they don't really write characters. They just make them kind of weird. There's really no like character development. Like, for example, they can just throw someone on the screen and just have some weird line, and that's their character. You got like Harry Dean Stanton on this, another great actor who passed away during the filming. It seems to be a recurring theme. There was like a lot of the Black Lodge stuff comes back. That same episode I was referring to, Nine Inch Nails plays at the Red Room. The full band, Nine Inch Nails, not some fictionalized account of them, but the actual band themselves plays on the screen. And then you get some black and white backstory about what I believe to be Laura Palmer's mother. When that whole thing happened, there was essentially this like weird looking, like almost like a demon insect that crawls in a girl's ear. It's all done in black and white back in the 40s or whatever. And I think what Lynch was trying to tell us is that was the mother of Laura Palmer, who's basically inhabited by evil and is trying to combat. It has like this eternal conflict with good versus evil, and she keeps watching this in the return, she keeps watching this scene in the boxing match of this like person just knocking someone out and just keeps watching it on repeat, which makes me think that she's definitely on the evil side, and that person who's that represents that knockout represents evil, and she's just watching that evil triumph over and over again. There's some other things I don't want to really talk about or give away much in terms of the surprise. I'm just kind of hitting on the bigger points. Some of the woodmen from the Black Lodge are brought back in the return as well. Is sort of these like mysterious characters, especially the one that was shown in the episode 6, which I mentioned, and goes to the town, takes over the radio station. Basically, people die. So it's like an agent of evil and things like that. Die through just him talking. He just says some weird shit. Apologies for the language, but he just says some weird stuff, and people die. Trying to think if there's anything else. Jim Belushi's in it. A lot of people harp on Belushi for being, according to Jim, or those kind of shows where he just plays the same character every time. But he's actually really good in The Return for some reason. He plays this casino owner in the Las Vegas segment, who ends up in Twin Peaks. Don't want to give too much away about the ending. We get to meet Diane, who's played by Laura Dern, the person who Agent Cooper is talking to most of the time on the recorder, and as well as the return of the FBI agents and things like that. Philip Jeffries does make a cameo in the form of a giant teapot in this like other dimensional thing. The series itself ends on just kind of an open end, with Cooper. Cooper and Diane essentially going to a alternate or parallel universe and finding Laura Palmer, or what is Laura Palmer in the parallel universe, and taking her to Twin Peaks to try to show her where she lives because she can't remember anything, and it just ends on the very intense cliffhanger. So it makes me think that we're probably going to get more. I would like more, just because everything is just so rich and interpretive. Can interpret it many different ways. Again, if you think about it in the context of good versus evil, the eternal battle of good versus evil, or yin and yang, if you're into that thing, it's kind of helpful to try to determine or decipher what's going on. There's no answers. Much like some aspects of life, there's no answers philosophically. It does provoke thought, which is what I like. Thought and meaning. And for that, Lynch, kudos to Lynch for being presenting the visuals to us and having us just saying, "What do you think of this?" And like, okay, well, here's my take on it. Again, I'm not one to play into the concept of fan service. I actually do not like fan service at all. I think this is a great example of an artist. Lynch is a great example of an artist who just does his own thing and has his own stories to tell, and doesn't really care about what other people think, which is what makes this series, as well as his other films and other works, great and enjoyable to watch. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming, too much information. I definitely recommend checking these things out if you haven't yet, or maybe watching if you have some time. It's only a couple seasons of the original run. If you've seen the original run and haven't seen The Return, I think you should jump on that. I remember one of my friends is writing a book about Lynch, and she said she had to watch The Return like a couple times. Didn't like it, but she it was almost like torture. It seemed like she was like, "Oh, I got to watch this thing again." But it's not for everyone. But if you can kind of put aside the oddness in sort of the like auteur, and just kind of approach it with like this is just someone trying to tell us a story of good versus evil. I think you'll have an enjoyable time. Just seeing the various things and try not to read into things too much. Just kind of taking things at surface level. I think that's where we get kind of caught up is when we try to again when we try to solve something ourselves or when we try to we're gonna get upset if we don't see what we want to see. I kind of don't agree with that. It's everything's an artistic choice, especially with Lynch and Frost. And I just think these guys have hit something that not many people have in terms of like mysticism and storytelling, and it's something that's intriguing to me, and I just wanted to share my love of it with you. I hope you're all well and staying safe and healthy, and I'll talk to you soon.